Greetings from First United Methodist Church of Los Alamos, New Mexico. We hope this message will be meaningful and relevant to your life and your relationship with God. We invite you to join us for worship on Sunday mornings. We have now resumed in-person worship with one service at 10 a.m., which is live streamed both on Facebook and on YouTube. We alternate each week between contemporary and traditional music. You may confirm worship times and receive more information by visiting our website, firstinyourheart.org. Now may you be blessed through the reading and hearing of God's holy word.
Our first scripture reading is from the 9th chapter of Isaiah. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied the nation, you have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Our second passage is Luke's account of the birth of Christ. In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. All who went to their own towns to be registered. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in bands of cloth and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. In that region there were shepherds living in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. Then an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for see, I am bringing you good news of great joy for all the people. To you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign for you. You will find a child wrapped in bands of cloth and lying in a manger." And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of heavenly hosts, praising God, saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace among those whom he favors." When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let us go now to Bethlehem and see this thing that has taken place, which the Lord has made known to us." So they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the child lying in the manger. When they saw this, they made known what had been told them about this child, and all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds told them.
Tonight I'd like to share two stories with you. The first comes from Jeannie Woodard, who runs a website called textweek.com, which gives resources on the weekly lectionary readings. Jeannie was a lay minister studying for her PhD in biblical studies when she gave birth to Philip, who turned out to have severe autism, requiring her to put her career plans aside. Although her ministry now takes place online with hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of ministers using her sites over the last 20+ years, impacting millions of churches. She gets more than 2 million hits a month on her websites. And here is her Advent story, which she published in 2002. As many of you know, my son Philip has autism. He is 10 years old and is severely handicapped by his disability. Our family has learned to slow down at Christmas a number of years ago when he was unable to tolerate any celebration. He could not handle the changing scenarios, the twinkling lights, the changes in grocery store displays, the changes in the sanctuary at church, presents appearing under the tree itself, and moved furniture. He would fall on the floor and scream, unable to move, afraid to open his eyes, almost constantly from Thanksgiving until well after Christmas was over. We carried him through that time, his head covered with a coat so we could get through the grocery store, or sat huddled with him in his room, carefully ordered exactly the same since summer, with no Christmas trappings. Of course, our neighbor across the street was one of those folks who bought every outdoor Christmas display, and my son slept on the sofa in the living room for 2 Decembers trying to stay awake so that he could make sure that all the lights across the street on the whole block were functioning correctly. If one went out or if the lights came on or turned off outside the proper times, he would scream and cry and panic until it was fixed. I spent an hour one cold night on top of the neighbor's garage replacing one bulb in a Santa display so the boy would stop screaming and go to sleep. Worship on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve was overcrowded and yet hushed, not a good combination for an autistic child. And I should note in there that she also received anonymous letters from members of her congregation telling her perhaps she should go to another church. Christmas celebrations at home were a nightmare, she says. Phil would scream and cry as each package was moved and gasped unwrapped. As frightened as he was when each new thing appeared, he was equally frightened when it changed or disappeared. We tried to find him a present he'd enjoy, but he'd merely scream and cry and panic at the intrusion on his carefully ordered world. And the gifts would sit ignored until he outgrew them and we gave them to some little boy who could appreciate them. He wanted nothing. He would look straight at toys we thought he would like and would not react at all. He asked for nothing. He anticipated nothing. He just screamed and cried at all of it. It is no bliss to have a child who doesn't get it, who doesn't want anything and doesn't want to have anything to do with Christmas commercialism, or it is only bliss in some romantic fantasy. In real life, it is a surreal nightmare. This year, right around Christmas, we once more asked what the kids wanted for Christmas, and our 14-year-old daughter sat down and made out her list. And our 10-year-old son, for the first time, answered the question. PlayStation 2, he said. I want a PlayStation 2, Christmas. We just about fell over. His sister pulled out a piece of paper and she wrote Phil's Christmas list at the top, and he wrote PlayStation Toe under the heading. At Sam's, he said, go to car. So we drove to Sam's. He had never looked at anything there, never seemed to notice that Sam's had anything he might want, but he led us right to the PlayStation 2, picked out the bundle he wanted and put it in the carts. Open at Christmas, he said. He watched gleefully as we wrapped the package, and he solemnly placed it under the tree. So a PlayStation 2 game set sits there wrapped with his name on it, and he waits to open it. December 25, he says. Open PlayStation 2, December 25. Last night, we returned from yet another rehearsal for Christmas with our daughter, and Phil found a Best Buy ad in the paper and turned immediately to the PlayStation games. He circled Harry Potter and John Madden football, and he handed it to Bob and said, I want Christmas. There were tears in my eyes. It's such a small thing, but such a truly amazing thing. It's one more bit of hope that he will be able to function in some semblance of society as an adult one day. That he might be able to live just a bit more independently. And one day want the things he needs to survive enough to work for them. Not a foregone conclusion with autistic children, which makes them particularly unemployable no matter their intelligence. Consumerism might be the enemy, but for a kid who understands none of it, it is only a hero in chicken soup for the soul stories. This Advent season, I am grateful for being able to appreciate what a complexity and a miracle is involved in such small, selfish acts as wanting something for Christmas and being able to express them to another person. I'm grateful that my son is able to enjoy some of the commercial, cultural trappings of the holiday this year instead of running from them screaming. I'm grateful for the many ways that Philip helps me to stop and look again, even at my most Christian conclusions. And I'm especially grateful that my son helps me see Christ's humble birth over and over again, even in the midst of nightmares and worries I could not have imagined 10 years ago, even in the midst of Advent. And the second story is my own. At the Christmas Eve service where I was doing my internship while I was in seminary, the first year there, as we were greeting people and leaving the service at the end of the Christmas Eve service, we heard a crash come from the fellowship area where people were going to gather for coffee and fellowship time. And it turned out that the son-in-law of one of the members of our church was carrying a bowl full of hot cider, apple cider, out. And as he was leaving the kitchen, the bowl literally exploded in his hands. And the worst part was that his then 3-year-old daughter, Hannah, seeing him come out of the kitchen, ran towards him, and so most of the cider spilled on her. And she was immediately rushed to the emergency room, and because she had second and third degree burns over more than 20% of her body, she was taken to the burn unit at the Shriners Hospital in Boston. And as they got there, they were taken back into the room. One of the nurses brought in a basket full of toys for Hannah to play with while the doctors were treating her burns, which literally took the whole night. And then, as they were being discharged at 6 a.m. on Christmas morning, Hannah's parents said, pick up all the toys and put them in the basket so the nurse can take them. And the nurse said, no, you keep them. They're a gift for you. Because it turned out that another family who had spent Christmas Eve in the burn unit at the Shriners Hospital had made a pledge that they would give baskets of toys to the hospital every year going forward, knowing what those families... Sorry, I worked on hard and not been crying here. Knowing what those families were going through. They didn't want anyone else to have experienced what they had experienced. Now, the title of this message is Christmas Miracles. But neither one of these stories are miracles the way we normally think of miracles. Because there were no miracle cures, there was no last-second reprieves. Phil is still severely autistic. Although it turns out that he is brilliant with electronics, as many autistic people are, and works for the IT departments for his local school district. And Hannah still has scars on her arms, although she's young enough she doesn't remember that night, but her parents certainly do. But oftentimes we're looking for those big miracles to happen. That Phil would no longer be autistic, or that Hannah's scars would miraculously go away one day. And when those things don't happen, we think that our prayers have not been answered, that God has not been there for us, that we've been abandoned, that we are alone. One of the things I learned from my Pentecostal brothers and sisters in seminary is to look for miracles. Actually, what they would say is, if you put yourself in the way of miracles, miracles will happen. Sometimes it's those big ones, but 99% of the time, it's those little miracles that happen every single day that we simply overlook because we're not looking for them to be miracles. And so what these stories show us is that in the darkest of times, there is still a bright light that shines through that darkness. there is a feeling of being blessed, a feeling hope, and maybe even joy during those dark days. And so there is Philip reminding his mother of Christ's humble birth, causing her to question everything that she took so much for granted, and being joyful and hopeful for the future, and in creating a new way of being in ministry that's impacted all of you, even though you probably have never even heard of her or her website until tonight. But not just you, again, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of churches around the world. She has reached more people through her ministry now than she would have ever done if she'd become clergy or if she'd been teaching at some seminary. And she says, I try to appreciate my son for who he is. He does everything a human being needs to do, and people who take the time to get to know him and work with him realize a lot about themselves and about God and about religion. And then there's Hannah, going through that nightmare scenario that none of us want to imagine, none of us would wish on our worst enemies. Being given toys by some people she never knew, who never knew her, but knew what it was like to experience Christmas night in the burn units. And said, we want to be able to be a blessing to those who are in the same spot for years to come. Knowing that the light of God is necessary in the darkest moments of our lives, on the longest nights of our lives, on the dark nights of the soul, and that light can overcome the deepest darkness. Just that one bit of light can shatter that and give hope. We don't need God. We don't need Christmas because everything is great in our lives. We don't need the gift of Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, because everything is wonderful. We need Christ because we live in brokenness. Christmas is not really for those who feel holly, jolly, and merry. Christmas is for those who feel hurt, who feel pain, who feel loss. Because it's in the darkness of our lives that we need the light of Christ to shine. Isaiah says, the people who have walked in darkness, on them have seen a great light. Those who lived in the land of darkness, on them the light has shone. For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. And he shall be called the Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. As we lit our candles this evening, we sang, O come, Emmanuel, which is a plea to God to ransom captive Israel that mourns in exile here. That's a cry of despair for God's presence to be known to us, that we would know God's peace and joy and, yes, even hope. A son is given to us. A child is born to us because we walk in darkness, because we need Christ's light to shine in this world. Christmas is a sign that God not only knows our pain, knows our brokenness, and our anguish and our sorrow, and in the midst of all of that, God is saying, I love you. And I want to be present for you, and I want you to know my peace. To know my love, to know my joy, to know my hope. I want you to know that I am with you. You are never alone, and there is nothing in all of creation that can separate you from my love, God says. And so on this longest night of the year, we know that it is in the darkest moments of our lives, it is in the dark night of our soul that the light of Christ shines the brightest. and that the light overcomes that darkness. And so from this night forward, the days get a little longer. The light gets a little bit more as we go forward. And the light of Christ continues to shine on us. That is the miracle of Christmas. It is the experience of God's love and of Christ's light, even when we didn't think it was possible. Even when we thought that God might be 1,000,000 miles away. Even when we thought that there was nothing that could reach us. Even when our sighs were too deep for words, as Paul says. The Spirit was there for us. The light of Christ was there for us. The hope of Christ was there for us. So whatever it is that you are feeling or experiencing this season, I pray that you will remember that there is nothing that can overcome the light of Christ. There is nothing which can separate us from God's love. Even in the darkest moments, Christmas is there. Christmas is not for the holly and jolly. Christmas is reminded of God's love. And at the light of Christ, the light of the world has come to us. So let me close with this prayer from Ted Loder. O God of all seasons and senses, grant us the sense of your timing, to submit gracefully and rejoice quietly in the turn of the seasons. In the season of short days and long nights, of gray and white and cold, teach us the lessons of endings, children growing, friends leaving, loved ones dying, grieving over, grudges over, blaming over. O God, grant us a sense of your timing. In this season of short days and long nights, of gray and white and cold, teach us the lessons of beginnings, that such waitings and endings may be the starting place, a planting of seeds which bring birth to what is ready to be born, something right and just and different, a new song, a deeper relationship, a fuller love. In the fullness of your time, O God, grant us the sense of your time. Amen.
Thank you for watching, and don't forget to follow our YouTube channel and Twitter, and like us on Facebook if you haven't already. And remember that every action you take today could change someone's life. So make sure it's a good one and be an agent of love. God bless.